When arrogant millionaire businessman Marcus Thompson kicked a homeless beggar out of his luxury restaurant in Manhattan, he never imagined that 3 hours later he would discover the beggar's true identity. What happened next would destroy his world, expose his darkest secrets, and lead to a revelation so shocking that it would make headlines across America and change the lives of thousands of people forever. Before we get to this wonderful story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the story. It was a bitterly cold February evening in New York City when Marcus Thompson, owner of Thompson's fine dining empire and worth over $85 million, was hosting the most important business dinner of his entire career. The exclusive restaurant on the Upper East Side was filled with Manhattan's most powerful elite: politicians, celebrities, Fortune 500 CEOs, and business moguls who could make or break his ambitious expansion plans with a single phone call or whispered recommendation. Marcus had spent 6 months meticulously planning and arranging this dinner to impress Senator Richard Hayes, whose political support and business connections he desperately needed for a massive real estate development project that would potentially triple his already substantial net worth. Everything had to be absolutely perfect down to the smallest detail. The wine was a $2,000 bottle of vintage Bordeaux from his private collection. The 7-course menu featured the most expensive ingredients flown in from France, Italy, and Japan, and the carefully curated guest list included some of the most influential and powerful people in New York's business and political circles. The dining room itself was a masterpiece of elegant design, with crystal chandeliers imported from Austria, hand-painted Italian wallpaper that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent, and custom-made furniture crafted by the world's most exclusive artisans. Every element had been chosen to project an image of sophistication, success, and uncompromising quality that would impress even the most jaded members of New York's elite society. But he had no idea what was coming next. Just as Marcus was raising his crystal glass filled with the vintage Bordeaux to toast the evening's anticipated success and the profitable business partnerships he hoped to forge, the restaurant's heavy oak front door suddenly opened with a loud creak, letting in a powerful blast of frigid winter air, along with swirling snowflakes and a disheveled homeless man who shuffled slowly and painfully toward the elegant dining area. The homeless man appeared to be somewhere in his early to mid-60s, with long, unkempt gray hair that hadn't been washed or cut in months, a scraggly beard that was stained with food and dirt, and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed or cleaned in weeks. His worn-out boots had holes that allowed the cold and wet to seep through, and his hands were cracked and bleeding from exposure to the harsh winter weather. He carried a torn and water-stained cardboard sign that read, "Veteran, please help, God bless," in shaky, barely legible handwriting that spoke of desperation and years of hard living on the unforgiving streets of New York City. The contrast between this broken man and the opulent surroundings couldn't have been more stark or uncomfortable. The homeless veteran looked completely out of place among the crystal, gold, and marble that surrounded the wealthy diners, like a ghost from another world that had somehow wandered into paradise. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," the homeless man said in a raspy, barely audible voice that had been damaged by years of cold weather, poor health, and probably decades of smoking cheap cigarettes. "I'm so terribly sorry to bother you fine folks during your elegant dinner, but I haven't had anything to eat in 3 whole days. Could anyone possibly spare just a few dollars so I can buy some food to keep from starving?" The silence that filled the room was deafening. The entire restaurant fell into an uncomfortable and shocked silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence, every fork was lowered to expensive china plates, and every eye in the room turned to stare at this unwelcome and deeply embarrassing interruption to their perfect evening of business networking and social climbing. Marcus felt his face burning with humiliation and rage as he realized that every single important person he was desperately trying to impress, people whose approval and support could make him hundreds of millions of dollars, was now staring at this disgusting disruption to the carefully orchestrated evening that was supposed to secure his financial future. Senator Hayes, the guest of honor whose political influence Marcus needed more than anything else in the world, was looking around the room with obvious disgust and disapproval, clearly wondering how such a prestigious restaurant could allow this kind of security breach to occur. The other powerful guests were exchanging glances and whispered comments that Marcus couldn't hear but could easily imagine were deeply critical of his inability to maintain proper control over his own establishment. "Security!" Marcus shouted at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing through the restaurant with a fury and desperation that surprised even himself. "Get this disgusting bum out of here immediately. How did he even get past the front desk? This is completely unacceptable." What he did next shocked everyone watching. But before the restaurant's security personnel could make their way through the crowded dining room to reach the homeless man, Marcus stood up abruptly from his seat, knocking over his expensive wine glass in the process and sending the vintage Bordeaux spilling across the white Italian linen tablecloth like blood from a wound. Ignoring the shocked gasps from his distinguished guests, Marcus strode across the dining room and confronted the homeless veteran directly, his anger and humiliation completely overriding any sense of basic human compassion or decency that might have once existed in his heart. "How dare you come into my restaurant looking and smelling like that?" Marcus yelled, his voice loud enough for every person in the crowded restaurant to hear clearly. "Can't you see we're having an important business dinner with some of the most powerful people in New York? You're absolutely disgusting and you're ruining this evening for everyone here." The homeless man took a step backward, clearly hurt and surprised by the vicious intensity of Marcus's verbal attack. His weathered face showed pain that went far deeper than physical discomfort, the kind of emotional wound that comes from being treated as less than human by someone who has forgotten that wealth and success don't give anyone the right to crush another person's dignity. "I'm very sorry, sir," the homeless man replied quietly, his voice trembling with cold and hunger, but still maintaining a dignity that seemed almost impossible under the circumstances. "I just thought maybe someone might be able to help. I'm a veteran of the United States military, and I've been living on the streets for many years now, and I don't care if you're a veteran or the President of the United States," Marcus interrupted with even greater fury, his face turning red with rage and embarrassment. "Get out of my restaurant immediately before I call the police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing and disturbing the peace." The humiliation that would haunt him forever. But Marcus wasn't finished with his cruel and public humiliation of the desperate man. In a gesture that would replay in his mind for the rest of his life, he pulled out his expensive leather wallet, removed a single crumpled dollar bill, and threw it contemptuously at the homeless man's feet like he was tossing scraps to a stray dog. "There's your charity, you pathetic loser," Marcus snarled with a level of cruelty that shocked even his most hardened business associates. "Now pick up that dollar and get out of here before I have you thrown out like the human garbage you obviously are." The homeless man slowly and painfully bent down to pick up the crumpled dollar bill, his arthritic hands shaking from cold, hunger, and the emotional impact of being publicly humiliated in front of dozens of strangers. As he straightened up with obvious difficulty, Marcus noticed that the man's eyes were filled with tears of pain and disappointment, but also with a strange look of recognition that made him feel uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite understand or explain. "Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Thompson," the homeless man said quietly, his voice filled with a dignity and grace that seemed completely incongruous with his desperate circumstances. "I'll remember this act of kindness for as long as I live." Something about the way the homeless man pronounced his name, with a familiarity that seemed to suggest some previous connection, sent an inexplicable chill down Marcus's spine. But he was too focused on trying to salvage his critically important business dinner and restore his damaged reputation in front of his influential guests to think seriously about the implications of the man's words or manner. The exit that left everyone uncomfortable. "Just get out of here right now," Marcus snarled, turning his back on the homeless man and walking back toward his table of shocked guests, trying desperately to project an image of confident control despite the obvious damage that had been done to the evening's carefully planned atmosphere. The homeless veteran shuffled slowly toward the restaurant's exit, each step seeming to require tremendous effort and causing him visible pain. But just before reaching the heavy oak door that would take him back out into the freezing February night, he turned around one final time and looked directly at Marcus with those penetrating, strangely familiar eyes that seemed to see right through all the expensive clothes and arrogant posturing to something deeper and more troubling beneath the surface. God works in mysterious ways, Marcus, the homeless man said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but somehow carried clearly across the entire restaurant. Sometimes the people we least expect to matter can change our lives forever, and sometimes the choices we make in moments of anger and pride determine our destiny in ways we never could have imagined. Then he pushed open the heavy door and disappeared into the swirling snow and bitter wind of the Manhattan winter night, leaving behind an awkward and uncomfortable silence that seemed to settle over the entire restaurant like a heavy blanket of shame and regret. The dinner that destroyed his dreams. Marcus tried desperately and frantically to restore the celebratory atmosphere that had been so completely shattered by the homeless man's appearance and his own brutal response to it. He called for the waitstaff to bring more wine, apologized profusely to his guests for the unfortunate interruption, and attempted to redirect their attention back to the business deals and partnerships that were supposed to be the evening's primary focus. But the damage had been done, and it was far worse than Marcus could have possibly imagined. The influential people seated around his table had witnessed a display of cruelty and heartlessness that revealed aspects of his character that no amount of money, success, or social positioning could disguise or excuse. "That was quite a display, Marcus," Senator Richard Hayes said coldly, his voice carrying a tone of moral disapproval that made Marcus's stomach sink with dread. "I have to say, the way you treated that poor man really showed me a side of your character that I find deeply disturbing and completely unacceptable." "Senator, please try to understand," Marcus stammered desperately. "I was just trying to protect our evening from an inappropriate disruption. I was thinking about the comfort and dignity of my distinguished guests." "From what?" Senator Hayes interrupted sharply. "From a hungry human being asking for basic help and compassion? From an American military veteran who has fallen on hard times and needed assistance from his more fortunate fellow citizens?" The senator stood up from his chair and placed his napkin on the table with a finality that made Marcus realize his carefully planned evening was completely ruined. "I've seen enough of your true character tonight, Marcus. I won't be supporting your development project under any circumstances. In fact, I think I need to seriously reconsider whether someone with your values and moral compass should be doing any kind of business in New York at all." The exodus that ended everything. One by one, like dominoes falling in a carefully orchestrated sequence, Marcus's other distinguished guests began making polite but firm excuses to leave early. Their faces showed unmistakable expressions of disgust, disappointment, and moral disapproval that made it clear they had no interest in continuing to associate with someone who could treat another human being with such casual cruelty and contempt. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, the philanthropist whose charitable foundation Marcus had hoped to partner with, gathered her purse and coat with obvious haste. "I'm afraid I have an early morning appointment," she said with icy politeness that fooled no one. "Thank you for dinner, Marcus. It was quite educational." Robert Chen, the billionaire tech entrepreneur whose investment Marcus desperately needed, simply stood up without saying a word, left a $100 bill on the table, and walked out of the restaurant while shaking his head in obvious disgust. Within less than an hour, Marcus found himself sitting alone in his own restaurant, surrounded by empty chairs, half-eaten plates of expensive food, and the ruins of business relationships that had taken him months to cultivate and mere minutes to destroy completely. The waitstaff moved quietly around the dining room, cleaning up the debris of what should have been Marcus's greatest triumph, but had instead become his most humiliating disaster. He sat there drinking wine and trying to process what had just happened, how a single homeless man asking for help could have destroyed years of careful planning and relationship building in one devastating evening. The phone call that changed everything. 3 hours later, Marcus was in his luxurious penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, drowning his sorrows and wounded pride in expensive whiskey while staring out at the Manhattan skyline and trying to figure out how to salvage his damaged reputation and ruined business relationships, when his phone rang with a harsh, insistent sound that cut through his alcohol-induced haze. "Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Sarah Rodriguez with the New York Police Department. I need you to come down to Bellevue Hospital immediately. It's extremely urgent." What? Why? Marcus slurred slightly, the whiskey and wine making it difficult for him to focus on the conversation. I haven't done anything wrong. I don't understand why the police would need to speak with me. Sir, there's been a serious incident involving a homeless man who was apparently at your restaurant earlier this evening. He was found unconscious and severely injured in an alley, about 6 blocks from your location. He's been asking for you specifically, and the doctors don't think he's going to survive much longer. Marcus felt annoyed and frustrated that his already terrible evening was being interrupted yet again by the same homeless man who had already completely ruined his business dinner and destroyed his carefully planned expansion project. Detective, I really don't understand why he would be asking for me specifically. I barely spoke to the man for more than a few minutes. Can't this wait until tomorrow morning? I've had a very difficult evening, and I really need to rest. Mr. Thompson, Detective Rodriguez said with a seriousness that cut through Marcus's alcohol-impaired judgment, the man is dying. He was severely beaten and robbed shortly after leaving your restaurant. The doctors don't believe he'll make it through the night, and his last request was to speak with you before he passes away. The hospital visit that would shatter his world forever. Against his better judgment, and despite his reluctance to deal with any more complications related to the evening's disasters, Marcus called his driver and made the trip to Bellevue Hospital, hoping to resolve this unpleasant situation as quickly as possible so he could return home and begin the process of trying to repair his damaged business relationships and salvage his ruined expansion plans. The hospital's emergency room was crowded with patients and their families, creating a chaos of sounds, smells, and human suffering that made Marcus want to turn around and leave immediately. The fluorescent lights were harsh and unforgiving. The air smelled of disinfectant and human misery. And everywhere he looked, he saw people dealing with medical emergencies, financial crises, and personal tragedies that reminded him how fortunate and sheltered his own life had been. He found Detective Rodriguez near the intensive care unit, a middle-aged Latina woman with kind eyes and a serious expression that immediately made Marcus understand this was not a routine police matter. Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming, Detective Rodriguez said as she approached him. Before you go in to see him, I need to tell you something that might be very difficult for you to hear. We found his identification and military records. His name is Colonel James Thompson, United States Army, retired. Does that name mean anything to you? Marcus felt like the world had suddenly tilted off its axis and he was falling through space without anything solid to grab onto. Thompson? That's my last name, but that has to be just a coincidence. There are thousands of people named Thompson in New York alone. Is it just a coincidence? Detective Rodriguez asked gently. He's been asking specifically for his son Marcus. He says you're his boy and that he's been looking for you for over 20 years. Mr. Thompson, I think there's something you need to know about your family history. The truth that had been hidden for decades. That's completely impossible, Marcus said, his voice rising with panic and disbelief. My father died when I was 8 years old. My mother told me he was killed in a car accident when I was just a child. I have the death certificate. I went to his funeral. This must be some kind of mistake or coincidence. Detective Rodriguez pulled out a thick manila folder filled with official documents, military records, and photographs that she handed to Marcus with obvious reluctance. According to his military service records, Colonel James Thompson served 3 tours of duty in Vietnam and 2 tours in the Persian Gulf War. He was decorated multiple times for bravery and leadership under combat conditions. After his military service ended, he worked for several years as a security consultant, but then he began having severe problems with post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression that eventually cost him his job, his house, and his family. Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands and found himself looking at military photographs of a young man who looked exactly like him at the same age. The resemblance was so striking and undeniable that there could be no question about their relationship. He's been homeless for the past 15 years after losing everything due to his mental health problems and inability to get adequate treatment for his war-related psychological injuries. Mr. Thompson, I believe you need to see him right away because the doctors don't think he has very much time left. The reunion that destroyed everything he believed about his life. Marcus walked into the hospital room feeling like he was moving through a dream or nightmare that couldn't possibly be real. The homeless man he had humiliated and thrown out of his restaurant just hours earlier was lying in the hospital bed, connected to machines that were monitoring his vital signs and keeping him alive. But now, cleaned up and under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room, Marcus could clearly see the facial features he had inherited, the same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning, and the bone structure that marked them as unmistakably related. "Dad," Marcus whispered, the word feeling strange and foreign after more than 30 years of believing his father was dead and buried. The man's eyes opened slowly, and when he saw Marcus standing beside the hospital bed, a weak but genuine smile crossed his bruised and swollen face, despite the obvious pain he was experiencing from his injuries. "Hello, son," Colonel James Thompson said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but still carried the warmth and love of a father who had never stopped caring about his child. "I knew it was you the moment I walked into that restaurant tonight. You look exactly like I did when I was your age, and you have the same determined expression I used to see in the mirror when I was young and thought I could conquer the world." Marcus collapsed into the uncomfortable plastic chair next to the hospital bed, his entire worldview and understanding of his own life story crumbling around him like a house of cards in a strong wind. "But Mom told me you died," Marcus said through tears that he couldn't control. "She said there was a terrible car accident and you were killed. We had a funeral. I remember throwing dirt on your coffin." "Your mother and I got divorced when you were 8 years old, Marcus," Colonel Thompson explained with obvious difficulty, each word requiring tremendous effort. "The custody battle was bitter and painful, and she was awarded full custody of you. She moved away and changed both of your names, and she told you I was dead because she thought it would be easier for both of you to start over with a clean slate without the complications of having me in your lives. The search that lasted 20 years. I tried to find you for over 20 years, son," Colonel Thompson continued, his voice growing weaker, but still filled with love and determination. "I hired private investigators, searched through public records, posted your information on missing persons websites, and even traveled to different states following leads that never seemed to go anywhere. But your mother had done a very thorough job of erasing our connection and creating new identities for both of you." Marcus felt like his heart was breaking as he listened to his father describe decades of searching for a son who had been told his father was dead. "Dad, I had no idea. I never knew you were looking for me. I thought you were gone forever. The war had damaged me in ways that I didn't understand at the time," Colonel Thompson said, his eyes reflecting pain that went far beyond his current physical injuries. "When I came back from Vietnam, I had what they now call post-traumatic stress disorder, but back then, nobody really understood what was wrong with me. I had nightmares, panic attacks, couldn't concentrate, couldn't hold down a steady job. I started drinking heavily to try to numb the psychological pain, and eventually, that drinking destroyed my marriage, my career, and my relationships with everyone I cared about." "What happened after the divorce? How did you end up homeless?" "I spent the first 10 years after losing you trying to get my life back together. I went through rehabilitation programs, got counseling, found work as a security guard, and tried to stay sober and stable. But the psychological damage from the war was too severe, and I kept having relapses that cost me jobs and housing. About 15 years ago, I lost my last apartment and ended up on the streets, and I've been homeless ever since." The confession that broke his heart. "Marcus, I need you to know something that might be hard for you to hear," Colonel Thompson said, reaching out with a trembling hand to touch his son's face. "I've been living in New York City for the past 6 months, ever since I found out through a newspaper article that you had become successful and owned restaurants here." Marcus felt a chill of horror running down his spine. "You've been in New York for 6 months? I've been watching you from a distance, son. I've stood outside your restaurant dozens of times over the past few months, just hoping to catch a glimpse of the man my little boy had become. I've seen you arriving for work in your expensive car. I've watched you through the windows during your business meetings, and I've read every newspaper article about your success and achievements. Why didn't you approach me sooner? Why didn't you try to contact me directly?" "Because I was afraid, Marcus. I was afraid that you would be ashamed of me, that my homelessness and mental illness would embarrass you in front of your successful friends and business associates. I was afraid that approaching you would somehow damage the wonderful life you had built for yourself." Colonel Thompson paused to catch his breath, and Marcus could see that talking was becoming increasingly difficult for him. Tonight was the first time I finally worked up the courage to walk into your restaurant and approach you directly. But I wasn't really asking you for money, son. I was asking for a chance to be part of your life again, to have some kind of relationship with the child I had lost so many years ago. The realization that crushed his soul. And I threw you out like you were nothing, Marcus sobbed, finally understanding the full magnitude of what he had done. I humiliated you in front of all those people. I called you disgusting and pathetic. I threw money at your feet like you were a dog begging for scraps. You didn't know who I was, Marcus, Colonel Thompson said with a forgiveness that made Marcus feel even worse about his behavior. You were protecting your business and your reputation. You were trying to maintain your position in front of important people. I understand why you reacted the way you did. No, Dad, you don't understand. Even if you had been a complete stranger, I had no right to treat another human being that way. The fact that you were my own father just makes it infinitely worse. Marcus buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by shame, guilt, and regret that felt like it might literally kill him. I've spent my entire adult life chasing money and status and the approval of people who don't actually care about me as a person. I've forgotten everything you and Mom taught me about treating people with kindness and respect. I've become exactly the kind of person I used to hate when I was younger. The father's dying words that would change everything. Marcus, listen to me very carefully, Colonel Thompson said, using what seemed to be the last of his strength to speak clearly and directly to his son. You've made mistakes, but you're not a bad person. You just got lost along the way, like a lot of successful people do. The important thing now is what you choose to do with the rest of your life. Dad, you're going to be okay. I'm going to get you the best medical care money can buy. I'm going to find you a place to live, get you proper treatment for your PTSD, and we're going to make up for all the years we lost. Colonel Thompson smiled sadly, and Marcus could see in his father's eyes that he knew he wasn't going to survive his injuries. I don't think I have much time left, son. Those men who attacked me after I left your restaurant did a lot of damage, and my body was already weakened by years of living on the streets, but I'm not afraid to die, because I got to see you one more time. I got to see what a successful and accomplished man my little boy became, even if I wasn't there to help guide you along the way. Dad, please don't leave me. I just found you again. We have so much time to make up for. Marcus, I need you to promise me something, and this promise needs to be more important to you than any business deal or financial opportunity you'll ever encounter. Anything, Dad. I'll promise you anything. Promise me you'll use your success and your resources to help other people, especially homeless veterans who are living on the streets right now, forgotten and abandoned by the society they served and protected. The promise that would define the rest of his life. There are thousands of veterans living on the streets of American cities, Marcus. They're suffering from the same kinds of psychological wounds that destroyed my life, but they don't have families or support systems to help them recover. They need someone with your influence and financial resources to fight for them, to create programs that can help them get back on their feet and rebuild their lives. I promise, Dad. I swear to you that I'll spend the rest of my life and every penny I have, if necessary, trying to help homeless veterans. I'll build shelters, fund treatment programs, lobby politicians, do whatever it takes to make sure other veterans don't end up dying alone in hospital rooms like you are. And Marcus, promise me one more thing. Promise me you'll remember that true wealth isn't measured by what you own or what you've accomplished professionally. True wealth is measured by the love you give to other people and the positive impact you have on their lives. Colonel Thompson reached out and took his son's hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong for someone who was dying. I love you, son. I always have and I always will. I'm proud of the man you've become, even if you've made some mistakes along the way. Take care of yourself, and remember that the most important thing in life isn't success or money or status. The most important thing is how you treat other people, especially the ones who can't do anything for you in return. Those were the last words Colonel James Thompson ever spoke. He died peacefully at 3:47 a.m., holding his son's hand, and finally reunited with the child he had spent 20 years searching for across the country. the funeral that opened his eyes to a different world. Marcus arranged for his father to be buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. The ceremony was attended by dozens of homeless veterans from New York City who had known Colonel Thompson during his 15 years living on the streets, and their stories about his character and leadership opened Marcus's eyes to aspects of his father's life that he had never known existed. As Marcus listened to veteran after veteran describe his father's kindness, courage, and selflessness during the darkest period of his life, he began to understand the man he had never really known. Despite his own struggles with homelessness, mental illness, and the daily fight for survival, Colonel Thompson had been a leader and protector among New York's homeless community. "Your dad saved my life more times than I can count," said Roberto Martinez, a Vietnam veteran who had lived in the same homeless encampment as Colonel Thompson for over 5 years. "When I was ready to give up and die on the streets, Jimmy would find me and remind me that I was worth something, that my life had value and meaning even if the rest of the world had forgotten about me." "He always talked about his son with such pride," added Maria Santos, a social worker who had tried for years to help Colonel Thompson find permanent housing and mental health treatment. "Even when he was hungry and cold and had nothing, he would light up like a Christmas tree whenever he talked about his successful son who had made something important of his life." "Jimmy organized our camp like a military unit," said David Kim, a Gulf War veteran who had been homeless for over a decade. "He made sure the weaker people were protected from violence, that everyone got a fair share of whatever food or supplies we could find, and that we looked out for each other like a family. He was the kind of leader who took care of his people even when he had nothing to give." The transformation that amazed everyone who knew him. In the months following his father's funeral, Marcus underwent a complete personal and professional transformation that shocked and amazed everyone who had known him during his previous life as a ruthless businessman focused solely on accumulating wealth and social status. He sold his expensive penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park and moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood in Queens, the same borough where he had grown up before becoming wealthy and forgetting his roots. He closed his chain of high-end restaurants and used the proceeds to fund homeless services and veteran assistance programs throughout New York City and beyond. Marcus established the Colonel James Thompson Foundation for Homeless Veterans, dedicating not just his financial resources, but also his time, energy, and professional skills to building shelters, funding job training programs, providing mental health services, and creating support networks for veterans who were living on the streets. He began spending his days working directly with homeless individuals, serving meals in soup kitchens, helping people navigate the complex bureaucracy required to access government benefits, and using his business connections to create job opportunities for people who had been written off and forgotten by mainstream society. The man who had once thrown a dollar bill at his own father's feet while calling him pathetic and human garbage was now spending 18 hours a day trying to restore dignity, hope, and opportunities to people who had been abandoned and marginalized by a society that preferred to ignore rather than address their suffering. The encounter that brought everything full circle. Exactly 1 year after his father's death, Marcus was working the overnight shift at a homeless shelter in Brooklyn when he encountered a situation that reminded him powerfully of that terrible night in his restaurant when he had destroyed his relationship with his father and ruined his own life in the process. A well-dressed businessman in an expensive suit had wandered into the shelter by mistake while looking for directions to a nearby luxury hotel where he was staying for a corporate conference. When he realized where he was and what kind of people surrounded him, he began making loud, disgusted comments about the human waste that filled the shelter and demanded that Marcus call him a taxi immediately so he could escape from the disgusting environment. "These people are absolutely revolting," the businessman said loudly enough for many of the shelter residents to hear his cruel words. "They're probably all drug addicts and criminals and mental cases. Why doesn't the city just round them up and put them somewhere else where decent, hard-working people don't have to look at them or smell them?" Marcus felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, but this time it was directed at the businessman rather than at the homeless individuals he was insulting and dehumanizing with his thoughtless words. Sir, Marcus said calmly but firmly, every person in this shelter is a human being with inherent dignity and worth that doesn't depend on their current circumstances or economic status. Many of them are military veterans who served our country with honor and courage. Others are working families who lost their homes due to medical bankruptcies, job layoffs, or other circumstances beyond their control. None of them chose to become homeless, and they all deserve to be treated with basic respect and compassion. The confrontation that changed a heart and mind. The businessman looked at Marcus with contempt and obvious annoyance at being lectured by someone he assumed was just another low-paid social worker or volunteer. Listen, buddy, I don't need a lecture about social responsibility from some do-gooder charity worker. These people are homeless because they made bad choices and didn't work hard enough to succeed in life. I worked my way up from nothing to become successful, and if I could do it, so could they if they really wanted to. Marcus pulled out his wallet and showed the businessman a worn photograph of Colonel Thompson in his military dress uniform, decorated with ribbons and medals that represented years of service and sacrifice for his country. This man served 3 tours of duty in Vietnam and earned a Purple Heart for bravery under enemy fire. He came home from the war with post-traumatic stress disorder and spent 20 years looking for the son who had been told he was dead. He ended up homeless, not because he was lazy or made bad choices, but because our society failed to provide adequate support for veterans struggling with invisible wounds and mental health problems. The businessman studied the photograph, and Marcus could see his expression beginning to soften as he processed what he was being told. He was my father, Marcus continued, his voice filled with emotion that he no longer tried to hide or suppress. And I spent most of my adult life thinking exactly the same way you do right now, believing that I was better than people like him until the night I threw him out of my restaurant for asking for help. He died 3 hours later, beaten and robbed in an alley, without ever getting the chance to have a real conversation with the son he had spent decades trying to find. The businessman's transformation? The businessman was quiet for several long minutes, processing what Marcus had told him and looking around the shelter with new eyes that seemed to be seeing the individual human beings rather than just a mass of social problems to be avoided or ignored. I had no idea, he finally said, his voice much quieter and more humble than it had been before. I've never really thought about homeless people as individuals with their own stories and circumstances. I just assumed they were all lazy or addicted to drugs or mentally ill. Some of them are struggling with addiction or mental illness, Marcus replied, but those are medical problems that require treatment and support, not moral failings that justify abandonment or cruelty. And many others are dealing with temporary setbacks that could happen to anyone: job loss, medical emergencies, family crises, or simply the inability to afford housing in cities where rents have become impossibly expensive for working people. Marcus spent the next 2 hours giving the businessman a complete tour of the shelter, introducing him to residents and sharing their individual stories of how they had ended up homeless despite their best efforts to maintain stable lives. By the end of the visit, the man was visibly moved and asked how he could help support the shelter's programs and services. I run a construction company, the businessman said as he was preparing to leave. We're always looking for reliable workers, and I'd be willing to give jobs to people here who are ready to work. Would that be helpful? That would be incredibly helpful, Marcus replied. Employment is one of the most important factors in helping people transition from homelessness to stable housing. Having a steady income makes it possible for people to rent apartments, rebuild their credit, and regain their independence and self-respect. The businessman left his business card and promised to return the following week to interview potential employees. As Marcus watched him walk away, he thought about his father and how proud Colonel Thompson would have been to see his son turning moments of potential cruelty into opportunities for understanding, compassion, and positive change. The movement that grew across America. Marcus's personal story of transformation and redemption began to spread through social media, news outlets, and word-of-mouth networks, inspiring other wealthy individuals and business leaders to reconsider their attitudes toward homelessness, poverty, and social responsibility. His foundation became a model for how business success could be channeled into meaningful social impact that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms of complex social problems. Within 3 years, the Colonel James Thompson Foundation had expanded far beyond New York City to operate programs in 12 major metropolitan areas across the United States. The foundation had built 18 homeless shelters specifically designed to serve veterans, provided permanent housing for over 3,000 individuals, and helped more than 8,000 people transition from homelessness to stable employment and independent living. The foundation's innovative approach combined immediate assistance like shelter and meals with longer-term support services, including job training, mental health counseling, substance abuse treatment, and help navigating the complex bureaucracy required to access government benefits and services. This comprehensive model had proven much more effective than traditional approaches that focused only on temporary relief rather than permanent solutions. Marcus himself had become a nationally recognized advocate for homeless veterans and social justice issues, testifying before congressional committees about the need for increased funding for veterans' mental health services and affordable housing programs. His personal story of redemption and transformation resonated with audiences across the political spectrum and helped change public attitudes about both homelessness and the responsibilities that come with wealth and privilege. The family that was never truly lost. 4 years after his father's death, Marcus received a letter that would bring his journey of healing and discovery to an even more profound level of completion and understanding. The letter was from Patricia Thompson Mitchell, a woman living in Phoenix, Arizona, who had been searching for her older brother James Thompson for over 30 years. She had seen Marcus's story featured in a national magazine article about business leaders who had dedicated their wealth to social causes, and she had immediately recognized her brother in the photographs Marcus had shared of Colonel Thompson. "Dear Marcus," the letter began, "I believe that Colonel James Thompson was my older brother Jimmy, who disappeared after returning from Vietnam and whom our family had been trying to locate for decades. If he's really gone, then you are my nephew, and I am your aunt. I have so many stories to share with you about your father when he was young, and I would love to meet you if you're willing to connect with the family that never stopped loving and searching for both of you." Marcus immediately flew to Phoenix to meet Patricia, who turned out to be a retired elementary school teacher with 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren. She had boxes of photographs, letters, and family memorabilia that revealed aspects of his father's life and character that Marcus had never known existed. The photographs showed a young James Thompson who had been a star athlete in high school, a devoted son who had cared for his aging grandparents, and a patriotic young man who had volunteered for military service because he believed deeply in serving and protecting his country. The letters revealed a thoughtful, intelligent person who had struggled with the moral complexities of war, but had maintained his compassion and humanity even under the most difficult circumstances. The extended family that welcomed him home. Through Patricia, Marcus discovered that he had dozens of cousins, second cousins, and other relatives scattered across Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado, who had been wondering about his whereabouts for decades and who welcomed him into their family circle with open arms and unconditional acceptance. The Thompson family had a rich history of military service that stretched back to the Civil War, along with traditions of community involvement, taking care of neighbors in need, and using whatever resources they had to help others who were facing difficult times. Marcus was invited to a family reunion in Tucson where he met more than 60 relatives who shared countless stories about his father's childhood, his character before the war had damaged him, and the family values that had shaped his worldview and moral compass. "Your daddy was the kindest, most generous person I ever knew," said his great-aunt Rose, who was 95 years old and still sharp as a tack. "Even as a little boy, he was always looking out for other people, always trying to help anyone who was hurting or in trouble. He'd give away his lunch money to kids whose families couldn't afford to buy them food, and he'd spend his weekends helping elderly neighbors with yard work and household repairs." Marcus realized that his commitment to helping homeless veterans wasn't just a way to honor his father's memory or to atone for his own previous selfishness and cruelty. It was also an expression of deeply rooted family values that had been passed down through generations of Thompsons who believed that those who had been blessed with advantages had corresponding obligations to help those who were less fortunate. the love story that healed his damaged heart. 2 years after meeting his extended family and learning about his heritage of service and compassion, Marcus met Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a clinical psychologist who specialized in treating post-traumatic stress disorder among homeless veterans and who had been working with several of the Thompson Foundation's programs. Jennifer was brilliant, compassionate, and completely unimpressed by Marcus's wealth or his transformation story. She had grown up in a working-class family in El Paso, Texas, had put herself through college and graduate school on scholarships and student loans, and had dedicated her career to helping people who had been traumatized by war, violence, and the experience of homelessness. Unlike the wealthy, status-conscious women Marcus had dated during his previous life as a selfish businessman, Jennifer was more interested in meaningful work and authentic relationships than in luxury, social recognition, or financial security. She drove a used Honda Civic that she had owned for 8 years, lived in a small apartment filled with books and plants rather than expensive furniture, and spent most of her free time volunteering at homeless shelters or providing pro bono counseling services to veterans who couldn't afford mental health treatment. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally over many months of working together on foundation programs based on shared values, mutual respect, and genuine affection rather than financial considerations, social climbing, or superficial attraction. Jennifer was the first woman Marcus had ever been involved with who seemed genuinely indifferent to his background as a millionaire businessman and who was more impressed by his current work helping others than by his previous success accumulating wealth and status symbols. The wedding that celebrated transformation and service. Marcus and Jennifer were married in a simple, meaningful ceremony held at the first homeless shelter that Marcus had funded in his father's honor. The wedding guests included dozens of homeless veterans and their families, social workers and volunteers who had worked with the Thompson Foundation, Marcus's extended family from Arizona and Colorado, and Jennifer's family from Texas. Instead of expensive wedding gifts, Marcus and Jennifer asked their guests to make donations to homeless services organizations or to volunteer their time helping people who were struggling with housing insecurity, mental illness, or the challenges of transitioning from military service to civilian life. The wedding reception was held in the shelter's dining hall, with food prepared collaboratively by residents, volunteers, and family members, working together to create a celebration that embodied the values of community, service, and mutual support that had become central to both Marcus and Jennifer's lives. The most moving moment of the evening came when Roberto Martinez, the Vietnam veteran who had been Colonel Thompson's closest friend during his years on the streets, gave a toast honoring the memory of Jimmy Thompson and celebrating the love story that had grown out of tragedy, loss, and the decision to transform pain into service to others. Jimmy always said that good things could come from the worst situations if you kept your heart open and your eyes focused on helping other people, rather than feeling sorry for yourself, Roberto said, his voice carrying clearly across the dining hall filled with people whose lives had been touched by Marcus's transformation. I think he would be proud to see how his son turned the most terrible night of his life into a foundation for helping thousands of people find hope, healing, and second chances. The children who carry on the legacy of service. Today, Marcus and Jennifer have 4 children who are growing up with a deep understanding of social responsibility, compassion for people who are struggling, and commitment to using whatever advantages they have to help others who are less fortunate. Their oldest son, James Thompson Martinez, named after his grandfather, is now 16 years old and volunteers every weekend at homeless shelters throughout New York City, helping with meal service, organizing clothing donations, and tutoring children whose families are experiencing housing insecurity. Their daughter Patricia, named after Marcus's aunt who had helped him connect with his extended family, is 14 years old and has started a program at her high school to collect clothing, hygiene supplies, and school materials for homeless students in their district. Their twin boys, Michael and Matthew, are 12 years old and have already announced their intention to become social workers or counselors when they grow up so they can continue their parents' work, helping people who have been traumatized by war, poverty, or other circumstances beyond their control. The Thompson-Martinez children attend diverse public schools where they interact daily with classmates from many different economic backgrounds, and they understand that their family's comfortable lifestyle comes with corresponding responsibilities to help others and to use their advantages to create positive change in their community and the wider world. The foundation that transformed America's approach to homelessness. The Colonel James Thompson Foundation has now grown into one of the nation's most effective and innovative organizations addressing veteran homelessness, mental health services, and the complex challenges of helping people transition from crisis situations to stable, independent living. The foundation operates comprehensive programs in 38 states and has helped more than 25,000 individuals move from homelessness to permanent housing and employment. Their model of combining immediate assistance with long-term support services has been adopted by government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and private foundations throughout the United States and internationally. Marcus serves as the foundation's president and CEO but takes no salary for his work, living comfortably but modestly on investment income from his remaining assets, and focusing all of his time and energy on expanding the foundation's programs and advocating for policy changes that address the root causes of homelessness rather than just managing its symptoms. The foundation's research and advocacy work has contributed to significant policy changes at both state and federal levels, including increased funding for veterans' mental health services, reform of zoning laws that had made it difficult to build affordable housing, and creation of employment programs specifically designed to help homeless individuals develop job skills and work experience. The daily reminder of what truly matters. Every morning before leaving for work, Marcus stops by the small memorial garden he created in his apartment building's courtyard to honor his father's memory and reflect on the lessons he learned during that terrible and transformative night, when he discovered that cruelty and indifference can destroy relationships and opportunities in ways that can never be fully repaired. The garden contains plants and flowers donated by families who have been helped by the foundation, along with a simple stone marker that reads, "In memory of Colonel James Thompson and all veterans who served with honor." Their sacrifice reminds us that true strength lies in protecting and serving others. The garden serves as Marcus's daily reminder that his comfortable life and meaningful work are built on the foundation of his father's sacrifice and suffering, and that he has a responsibility to use his remaining years to help as many people as possible find the hope, healing, and second chances that his father never lived to experience. The impact that continues to grow around the world. The story of Marcus Thompson's transformation from selfish businessman to compassionate advocate has inspired similar foundations and programs in 12 countries, demonstrating that the combination of personal tragedy, moral awakening, and dedicated service can create positive changes that extend far beyond individual lives to impact entire communities and social systems. Universities now teach case studies about the Thompson model of using personal wealth and business skills to address complex social problems, and business schools regularly invite Marcus to speak about the relationship between financial success and moral responsibility. The Foundation's innovative approaches to homelessness prevention, mental health treatment, and employment development have been studied and replicated by organizations throughout North America, Europe, and Australia, creating a global network of programs that trace their origins back to that terrible night in a Manhattan restaurant when a homeless veteran asked his son for help and received cruelty instead of compassion. The lesson that transcends individual transformation. But perhaps the most important lesson from Marcus Thompson's story isn't about business success, social responsibility, or even personal redemption. It's about the fundamental truth that every human interaction carries the potential for profound consequences that extend far beyond what we can see or imagine in the moment. The homeless veteran who died in a hospital bed holding his son's hand never lived to see the thousands of lives that would be saved, the families that would be reunited, the veterans who would receive treatment and support, or the communities that would be transformed by the foundation created in his honor. Marcus's story demonstrates that our treatment of the most vulnerable and marginalized members of society reveals who we truly are as human beings, and that the choices we make in moments of frustration, embarrassment, or inconvenience can determine not only our own destiny, but also the fate of countless others whose lives intersect with ours in ways we may never fully understand. The foundation that began with one man's guilt, grief, and determination to honor his father's memory has become a movement that continues to grow and spread, touching new lives and creating new possibilities for healing and transformation with each passing day. And in the mystery of life, death, love, and redemption that connects all human beings across time and circumstance, Colonel James Thompson's spirit lives on through every person who finds shelter from the cold, every veteran who receives treatment for invisible wounds, every family that is reunited after years of separation, and every act of compassion that transforms a moment of potential cruelty into an opportunity for grace, healing, and hope. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.